I'll give it back to you. All right, thank you everyone for your patience. Yes, it's certainly a virtue. I think that's a great segue into our conversation this morning. So again, great job on the first activity. I'll be leading us through a dialogue called Healing Our Spiritual Wounds. And this is specifically through the lens of faith and spirituality for Black SGL men and other LGBTQ plus people. And again, this is designed to be conversational. So of course I'll guide us through some parts of it, or we'll invite folks to share as they see fit. So I'll tell you a bit about me. We'll talk about the history of the Black church and the role that the Black church has played for us as Black people. And then what the Black church has meant and been for Black LGBTQ plus people specifically. What I call the rift, so the tearing away and the kind of disengagement of the church, and then the reconciliation. Many of us have been able to reimagine and are in the process of reimagining what our faith looks like as LGBT people. And then what to do next, now and next. So, like I mentioned, this space is designed to be a safe space where we'll look at our healing journey and self-discovery journey, as well as folks can share some of their own practices. We'll look at addressing spiritual wounds, as well as how do we navigate trauma that leads to personal growth and connection. And then how do we look at this part of the work as a greater sense of self-awareness, self-love, and spiritual well-being. But before I went any further, I wanted to take a moment to honor and celebrate our dear friend and brother, Dr. Stephon Wallace. He was a great, certainly can celebrate. He was co-faculty with me in this space, but a dynamic man just altogether. So before we move forward, I just want to take a moment to honor him with a moment of silence. I'll also say too, just as not necessarily a trigger warning, but just if any point of the dialogue just becomes so much to where you need a moment, you just step away, or you would rather not engage, I certainly invite that. So nothing that will be so overwhelming to where you'll be caught off guard, but I know that faith and spirituality can be a very sensitive subject for a lot of folks, and so if you needed to take a moment, I certainly invite you at any point to reset and join us. So about me, that kind of centers me in this faith space, serving a few roles. So I co-lead the Vision Church of Los Angeles, leading their operations as well as overseeing the ministries. I'm the national director of I-Advance, the United Progressive Pentecostal Church. I-Advance is the leg of the national ministry that includes youth and young adults, education, evangelism, and entrepreneurship. And so that's a national initiative that looks at how we centering those elements of faith and spirituality. That's not just church. So again, looking at entrepreneurship, evangelism, education, and youth and young adult work. And the job that pays my bills is at Ahmad, and I'm also president of LA Pride. So saying that to say that there's this intersectional way in which we get to show up in the world, specifically as individuals of faith. And also about me, just my personal journey. So I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, so I know a lot of us are Southern or Southern adjacent. And was raised very, very churchy. And so I was raised Apostolic Pentecostal. So I don't know if folks know about the Apostolic Church, but yes, but very rigid, very, limited in kind of how we engage as human beings, let alone believers. And so, my experience was couldn't wear short sleeves, couldn't wear shorts, didn't watch movies, didn't play sports, could not go to activities, so no dance, no prom, no football game. And there was such a tenet of the faith that was really centered around guilt and shame. So making you feel bad about stuff was the way in which it was pretty much controlled. So even if it was, you're showing interest in a person, that was a way to be weaponized against you. Or I want to explore the world as a way to be weaponized. And so a lot of my journey was really overcoming, not even withstanding the sexuality piece, just, I like to wear patterns and colors. Well, that's not God. Okay, sure. But say that to say that experience, and that was, we were part of the Pentecostal church from I was about 8 up until 20 when I was grown and could leave. So that really did color and inform my own spiritual journey. And I came out at about 25. I always knew what was tea, and I feel like everybody else knew too. But me telling myself the truth, I often thought I had to sort of abandon either side of myself as an individual of faith and an LGBT person, like they could not coexist. So we'll talk about that a bit today.
I was just gonna have a question about so since you are so deeply into the church, how has that been for you? When you came out at 25, did the church show you or anything? How has your journey been being with the church?
That could be his own presentation, believe it or not. And I'll talk a bit about that along the way. But yes, I was pretty much excommunicated from my church. It was very much, you don't belong here, you don't belong to God. So I had to really go on this journey to not only find myself, but redefine who God was. And so even just being a forward thinker and asking questions, that was not very welcomed. And then when it was layered with the whole sexuality piece, that was just the candle on the cake for that institution. And so that was a conversation I had. I was, because when I left the church, I was very invested in the church. I taught Sunday school, I led praise and worship, I kept the finance office, and we had a really big church. So when I was leaving, I talked to my pastor, I was like, sir, this ain't gonna work. And he was like, I know you're gay, you know you're gay, few other folks know, but let's just not make it a big deal. Let's just not, you don't have to tell nobody. And so I did that for about 2 weeks. And I was like, I don't like this, sir, this is not gonna work. And so he really, I respect him dearly. He really kind of created this space to where he said, well, you believe God just like I believe God. And so we might be in different spaces of who God told what. So I encourage you to find God the way you claim he's found you. And so I was like, well, I believe I'll do that. And I actually circled back to that church many years later to talk to the pastor. And he actually, was able to celebrate my courage and all those different things. But then I had to say, well, where was this 10 years ago? How many folks might not have that same level of courage to move forward, specifically because for black folks, many black folks, the church, faith and family are two major pillars. And when we sort of come into a space of self-actualization, often one or both of those are very traumatically torn away from us. So I'll tell more about my story. But yeah, it was not, surprise, thank you for, coming out, resume your post. It was very much running out in the darkness of night. You're trying to not be stoned. But yeah, so the Black church, thank you for that question. So for many of us, and again, for context of this dialogue, a lot of the framing is through the lens of black gay men or black same-gender loving men, but many of the principles expand beyond only the male experience. So for the Black church, even folks who not necessarily have been a part of a church or have not been for a long time, the institution of the church really has represented a great deal. And so for the Black church, it's often been a connection to family. I know one thing too is my mom's a pastor and her grandmother was an evangelist. So coming through this long line, this lineage piece adds a lot of value to black people. A lot of our religious education began in the church. Like I said, I taught Sunday school and I taught children ages 4 to 8 for many years. And so you're introducing concepts of Adam and Eve and Jonah and the whale and Noah and the ark. And a lot of those elements of faith teachings began in the church. And then our spiritual formation, a lot of our values and how we navigate the world began with the church. And then it also looks at societal, buffering against societal oppression, but then also just a space to build community. For many, the church has been designed as a place to belong. And for many black folks, since black people have been in America, the church was often the seat of social justice. And so many of our great leaders either moved through the church or the church was a partner in how we were able to move the world forward. But then when we look at it through the lens of the black LGBT experience, the church was really steeped in homophobia, misogyny, transphobia, AIDS phobia, a lot of things that have really been counter to that broader sense of humanity. And so again, some of the positive effects of the church have the generational connection, a sense of spirituality. So a lot of times, even if it's not the church itself, a lot of times being connected to the institution gives folks a greater sense of something greater, something bigger, something higher. And so part of my faith journey, and I'll share, but I'll share now too, is that when I was on my own kind of journey to reimagine God, I recognized that the limited version of God that my parents gave me was a different God than I had been experiencing. So I didn't quite have language for what this God is, but I know it's not this God that y'all trying to make me believe. And so even in the context of this conversation, many of us might have reimagined the name we call God. Some might say source, some might say great creator, some might say the universe, some might say nothing. It just might be a feeling. But there is this sense of positive life force that many of us can connect to, and it often began with an institution. Sense of identity, sense of belonging, and a sense of community. You know, for many folks, we talk about like the church picnic and the fish fry and the Christmas play and the Easter play and all these different things that quite honestly have nothing to do with doctrine so much as, you know, these are traditions that we just know. What are some like black church traditions that folks might remember?
Like Friends and Family Day.
Perfect, Friends and Family Day. Invite one person, whoever brings the most people win a gift basket. Yeah. What else?
The raffle, the potluck.
Potlucks is another one, yes.
The fellowship after service.
100%. Yeah. The church let out.
The church let out.
Yeah. All these different things. So what's that?
Before afternoon service.
Yeah, right? That in between. Get your plate because church started again at 6. Yeah. But these are like, and they went from all over the country, but those are like some tenets of the faith or of the experience. You know, it's just like women in the big hats. That's just a thing that we just sort of have been intrinsically connected to. I know, like I said, I taught Sunday school, and we used to have what was called vacation Bible school. Yeah. Right. And you get cookies and juice, and you, at the end of it, you have some little program. Now tell them what you learned. J's for Jesus, all that kind of stuff. But that's like universal things that brought us a great sense of belonging as a people. And so then when we look at all those rich and warm memories that we had and shared, even in those few minutes, and how when we layer in our sense of humanity, how instantly it becomes something different. And so it's like, you know, here you are teaching Sunday school, singing in the choir, putting the flowers in the lobby, and you're showing up as your whole self. And then the institution says, now we love you, we can't really deal with all that you're bringing. We love you and what you do. The flowers look wonderful. First lady's hair looks wonderful. Well, come in here with all that, fill in the blank, whatever that is. And so that creates this distance between this institution that I love and how they feel about me. And so then when we look at the Black Church's stance on same-gender loving relationships or LGBTQ plus relationships, we're often put in a place of where we have to decide which parts of ourselves that we want to celebrate and bring into the world. Another negative effect is the constructs of masculinity and femininity. And there's this very hard binary in which, you know, we have been prescribed to come into the world. I mentioned my upbringing too, and, you know, I'll say around my mid-teens or so, I like to add a little color to my life. So I wanted a little jazzy sock, a little pocket square, a little neckerchief, and they was like, whoa, wait a minute. You can wear a pocket square, but they gotta be solid. Why? Who said so? I got a suit on, I got a polka dot pocket square versus a navy one. Oh, that's too feminine. Who said so? And so again, early on, we're kind of sort of guided and groomed with these constructs, and that creates a very negative dissonance. I know a lot of young folks, not even young folks, but folks when they're coming from their sense of identity, and they're, young boys are forced to wear suits and they don't like suits. Young girls are forced to wear dresses and they don't like dresses. And that creates this whole, I don't like dresses, I don't like being forced, I don't like God because I'm being forced. Jeff?
I know it's not Q&A.
Sure, yeah, we can talk throughout.
I have to ask this because I'm somebody that grew up in the church. My mom was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor.
Mhm.
So I'm a church kid, I'm a PK.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever like deal with the mental factors of like running to the altar and wanting God to like take it out of you because you just felt like that's what everybody felt was the right thing, but it was always an inkling in your mind that you knew that who you are was like the correct thing?
100%.
Have you ever felt like that?
Yeah, and there's a portion of this talk today that's around trauma that we'll talk about. But absolutely, that was a whole portion, I call it the wilderness, this
Yes.
dark part of my life where I was like praying to God to take the gay away and make me like women, make me not want to wear a neckerchief, like all these different versions of like, God, do make me something other than what I am. And then we will talk about that too, but the impacts of what that does to the sense of humanity and how many of us have to heal and grow from that. But I would love to hear, when we get there, for you to share more about your experience
Of
too.
course.
Dr. Q?
Well, should I wait as well?
No, we're gonna make it work.
Yeah, because I remember when I was 15, I'm a PK as well. I
All right.
remember when I was 15, the summer of my being 15, I wanted to be ungay so bad. And I was praying to God about it. And I took it to the point where I would not look at boys or men. I would avert my eyes. And when I think back, I'm like, poor baby, you were ill.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
You had a mental illness.
You had a mental illness, for
To
sure.
where you are not even going to look. Wasn't like I was looking at them
Lustfully.
like lusting,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
because I wasn't there yet. That came a little later.
You were just observed.
You and I was attracted to them. Like, that was who I vibed with. That was who I would want.
Mm-hmm.
And so to try to not be that, I'm not even looking. I mean, really, who goes through the world averting their eyes?
A lot of us though, yeah.
So, yeah.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I was about to say you'd be surprised.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, the folks who make the most noise and who are so aversive usually be the ones who that's their tea
They the
anyhow.
bottom.
Yeah, but yeah, because we'll talk more about that because that's very specific to black men, like that level.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
But yeah, we're not about to change.
We're not about to change. We can say 99.99%.
Well, there you go. But yes, we love how however you show up, we love it.
Okay, we will.
And yeah, this is something too. Kind of been lifted a bit. What I call the disengagement of authenticity. So you're stifling parts of yourself just to fit into the space, i.e., the open closet. In a sense, you in the closet, they know you, you know yourself, the people know you, but you just trying to show up in this space and sit up there with your dark-colored suit on and your, over exaggerated masculine mannerisms, and the people like, girl, you get it. And some folks go so far as, they'll marry a woman or they'll, all the different things. And it's just like all of those are indirect impacts of not being able to show up as your full self. And then stigma and tension. It's a lot of work. Has anybody ever tried to like fake straight or like kind of navigate a room like, oh, let me tone it down a little bit. Let me watch my wrists. Let me watch my references to certain pop culture items. And you'll be like, this is a lot of work. I mean, you have to step out and be like, oh, girl, I don't know nothing about no sports. Now I'm telling these people about the 49ers or whatever, trying to be relevant. And you're like, I'm weak, trying to Google, who is the quarterback? But again, we do this, and this is prevalent in the church as well.
I have a question.
Please.
What about the people that, this is a good conversation.
Thank you.
Because there are guys that I know that are, I would say, metrosexual. Because of their mannerisms and how they carry themselves. And I used to find myself like not being as flamboyant as I would want to be around those people because they weren't as flamboyant as me. But now I find that when I'm in a room with people that are what I would call moderate sexual, I find myself just like being more comfortable in that space because I'm not thinking about my actions and my mannerisms because those people share that idea too. You know what I'm saying? I feel like now I can be my authentic self in a room because I don't feel like, well, they got deep voices, so let me turn on my extra deep voice. You know what I'm saying? They talking about whatever, let me act like I can chime in and have this conversation. But like now the spaces are changing. Like now those people are having the conversations that we're having. So,
Yeah, and I think that speaks so much to the power of authenticity. You know, when we can show up in a space, and that's why this work is so important, because we talk about all the time the power in visibility. You know, and it's just like I've even experienced it myself. It's like you scan the room and you'd be like, oh, okay, somebody in the room, I can kind of give a little bit more than I would have I had not. And so like that is again, it's just such a necessary part of authenticity. And then also, you know, the power of community. You know, so it's like we're in this space and there is no sense of human alignment. You know, going back to the, you know, the football thing. And of course, LGBT people like sports, you know, this is just an example. But you go into a space in which you have like very low engagement. Like it's very limited on how you can interact. Or like you said, you find little ways to kind of pulse in and just be like, this is not really my team, but ooh, go team, or oh, yay, touchdown, whatever the thing is. But then you realize, oh, this girl's not worried about that like me either. So let's stop. So again, even taking it back to this lens, when we're looking at it through the lens of faith and spirituality, there have been institutions that have created that same kind of dynamic in the sense of like, okay, but the men are only wearing solid suits in here, so I'm gonna only wear solid suits. Or the women are, you know, only wearing long hair, so I'm gonna get mine long. But then you see like again, when there is one who represents your experience, that's a freedom that comes with that. And so, church hurt, that's a phrase that we talked about and we've heard historically, even if we have not experienced it we ourselves, there's indirect impacts of church hurt because, you know, using the same example, child went down to that church, I went, and I'm telling you about it, you're less likely to go just because they gave you a hard time, what they're going to do to me. So like, when we look at church hurt, it might not necessarily be your direct experience, but there is a level of connection that still comes specifically as a community, because we as a community have experienced church. So you might, I love my church, or my parents love me, or I don't go to church, but there's still a community element of it, specifically because of the work we do and the communities we serve, where this spirituality leg is a major part of who we are as a people. So church hurt by design, by definition, this really refers to the emotional distress and pain that comes with a religious institution. That could be through the hands of an individual, a faith leader, or the body as a whole. So many times, and we'll talk about it a bit today, you know, it is the institutional leader who's sort of the culture setter. So it's like, as goes the pastor, so does the congregation. As goes the first lady, as goes the women of the church. Like there's this kind of dynamic in that way. So it could be perpetuated by the individual or the group at large. And one thing too is that church hurt could be emotional, physical, or spiritual. You know, and it's a sad reality that many SGL men and LGBT people as a whole have suffered physical harm at the hands of institutional leaders and institutions of faith. Dr. Q? And
so I think that is true about sort of the leaders in the church setting the tone and the culture and the practices. But the reverse is also true. Because in my experience, I've met and worked with a lot of pastors, ministers, who are actually quite progressive on LGBT issues themselves, but will say, my church,
they ain't for that.
they're not going to allow this. I'll be run up out of here.
Yeah.
I cannot take this position. It is my position personally, but as a pastor of this church, I cannot take that position because I won't have a position.
That's so true, and if I can even add, I mentioned the church that I was raised in, and around 20, you know, was leaving. I had a conversation with this leader, and that was the conversation, even in the apostolic church. And I remember at the time I started wearing my hair in like flat twists. I don't know if folks know flat twists, but okay, of course you know. So, right, you know, very 2000s. Right. And so I'm in there, and he's like, I like your hair, blah, blah, blah. And it was exactly that. He was like, I've known you since you were a child, and I know God is with you, and all the kind of things that affirm me, but these folks ain't gonna be for them. So you got to pick your battles. It was really much kind of my charge. But yeah, and we've seen that too, specifically if we look at like institutional governance. You know, some churches have boards and trustees and people got to vote and all these different things. And I have been a part of meetings where the pastor gets voted out. And a new one gets voted in. And the people in the pews looking like, yeah. If anybody else want to try, he can vote you out too. But yeah, so we're here from Darius then.
Yeah, I just
here and then here.
here.
No, I was gonna say something along the same lines as Dr. Q. I didn't know that this was a term, so it was really good to have like that word to describe this, because this is something I've dealt with in my own personal experience with the church. The one I grew up in was a very close-knit community, mostly older folks. But something that I always struggled with was the fact that like the culture of the church, of that church, was very unwelcoming towards like different sexualities or gender identities. But the actual individual people were very affirming of me and very supportive of me as a person. So it's like that conflict between like, I know you, you know me, we have a good relationship one-on-one, but I can't be in this institution or this space at large because I don't feel welcome here because of the teachings, because of like what's being preached and what is being portrayed as like good Christianity, even though the individual people themselves aren't like that.
Yeah, that is a real thing, and you know, even kind of to frame it in the sense of the work we do as LGBT people, there's more broadly, there's often sort of that layer of like, well, I'm connected to you as an individual. You know, we see this a lot in TGI work, transgender, gender nonconforming, intersex work. Well, I know you as an individual, but I can't get with the movement. Or I know you and love you as a person, I just don't understand outside of you. So like that's this kind of universality there to where it's just like what you do because you know me. And so I don't think I talk about it all here, but I do maybe a little. But kind of part of my next layer of the work has been engaging with faith leaders and institutions of faith with that very strategy in the sense of, you know, I would say too, just through the lens of Christianity, Jesus was the ultimate advocate.
Yes, he was.
Very much showing up for people he himself did not represent and issues that he did not himself live. So like, we have a call to action as faith leaders to do the same. You know, we talk about, you know, folks who might know biblical teachings, and often we'll talk about the woman with the issue of blood. That's a very kind of a universal story that many of us know. For those who don't know, this is a woman who had a 12-year-long menstrual issue, and she pushed through a crowd when she saw Jesus, and she touched him, and she was healed from touching the hem of his garment. And Jesus was like, oh, you know, you touched me, and now the woman's healed because she pressed through to touch Jesus. The analogy I give to faith leaders, specifically male leaders, it's like, well, Jesus, as a male-identified person, never understood menstruation. But he was able to resolve and respond to a need, one he himself did not understand through lived experience. Such goes our work as LGBTQ plus advocates and affirming leaders. And so finding ways for people to understand and translate, I think is really important. But that was a bit of a tangent, but it was very, very valuable. So thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment because, like, when I think of church hurt, I think, and this also is like a lived trauma that exists in me, like, you know, very deep rooted, is I see like churches and the teachings of like religion as a weapon. Right? I feel like when I think of church hurt, I think of how people have utilized, you know, the readings in the book, you know, as weapons to lead their own ideals and not allow people space to, you know, find spirituality, right? They've tried to make it definitive, and it is not definitive. And so when I think of church hurt, I think of like people congregating together and like pushing their ideals like it's in some political, you know, thing, instead of just allowing people the space to find spirituality, right? I mean, like for me, I think of God as, you know, when I think of God, I call it higher power. I think of it as being in the neurons, right? Like it exists in all of us. There's no one who doesn't have spirituality. Sometimes you have strayed away, right? But God is still with you. Because if you wasn't, you'd be dead, right? Or you'd be somewhere, you know, worse off than you are, right? And so I believe that spirituality exists in everybody, but sometimes the problem is church hurt, right? Like removing my access. And I think of it as like weaponized, right? And I've learned, just as you have, like my own way to find that. But I think it's really sad. Like when I think of church hurt, it really makes me upset that like, you know, people get closed off to their access to spirituality, because no matter what you do, even when you walk out of this door today, you know, you still have access, you know?
Yeah, and we look at that, that's valuable. We look at that a bit here, like the weaponizing and demonizing of the tools that God has given us. So we'll look at that a bit too, but you're right, a lot of times too, folks will weaponize in service of their own biases.
I've even almost inflicted what the church inflicted on me back on them. Like, that's not God. Girl, that is not Jesus. You did not do that right. You know?
Being empowered, yeah. So
Judging
I think we had Jet and some and you again.
I was just gonna say, Demonte literally took it out of my mouth. Like, so all of this has two components. So there's spirituality and there's religion. So religion is a practice. Like, and I think that's what a lot of Christians have not dived into. They're so focused on like what the word says, and the word has so many correlations of how we should move in this practice, right? So I feel like if we got the idea of getting spirituality inside of us, like Demonte said, because we all have that, we're all spirits having a human experience. So we would tap into our spiritual side, and the church would take off the blinds and be like, we are all spirits embodying this thing together, love, faith, energy, instead of being like, oh, you gay, so you can't give me the word of God. How can I not? I'm still a vessel, and God still works through me. I can still prophesy and teach the word and give a word,
100%.
even if I'm a homosexual man that does not depict how God works through me. So I feel like if we as humans could understand that piece of it, that it's a spiritual experience versus a religious experience, then a lot of things could change.
I agree, and I even layer in a third leg of that: spirituality, religion, and faith. Because oftentimes too, when I did not have any connection to an institution, so no religion, and did not have the faculties of my spirituality, there was still something that guided me as I was trying to repair myself. And so a lot of times too, some folks are off the fray. They just like, I don't believe in nothing. Understandably so sometimes. But there's this world, there's this space that what I call faith, that guides us even when we can't put it into language ourselves. So I would agree, spirituality and religion, but faith is sort of something that we have no control of, but it certainly informs who we are. We'll hear from Darius, then we'll move forward.
Yeah, sorry to make it longer, but I agree with Jay and what Demonte said. Like, I feel like in my own experiences, like, my church has been very focused on like making like the practice of Christianity and not necessarily thinking of it as a philosophy, as a lifestyle, as a way of being, and like you have to be a good Christian because you tick off all the boxes. And I think it's very cruel when you think about it, because like for people who maybe aren't doing those things, it's saying like, oh, you're the way, like any negative events that happen to you, it's like your fault essentially, because you don't believe enough or because you haven't tried hard enough. So there's like this aspect of like, you know, you aren't doing the work, the necessary work to be a good person, and that's why you don't deserve it.
Yeah, then that goes to that weaponizing again, and how somebody
pleased with you.
Yeah, somebody calls it as like a vending machine. You put in the right thing, you get out the right thing. You know, if you're not, you didn't put enough money in. If not, that's your fault. That's not God's fault, because I got mine, you didn't get yours. So that whole sort of vending machine faith too. Church hurt, we shared all of this already, really can lead to senses of isolation, loss of faith, and disillusionment. So like that whole, well, ain't nothing real, or I don't care about anything, you know, that real disconnection in that way. Also could lead to questioning belief in God and relationships with God. You know, I can speak from my own experience. That was a whole time where I was like, well, God, you can't be real. If this is what it is, and this is what you gave me, and I'm not just trying to figure it out, where's this whole all-knowing being? And how do I fall in? So there are moments of that. And then church hurt can lead to other types of conflicts with power and authority and just attitudes altogether. You were saying it too, like you perpetuate these kind of mores because that's what you were given. And I can even say too, for me, I had a season of hypocrisy in the sense of I was saying, but this is what it's gonna be, and I was trying to play the game. So I was like, well, I could just have my little gentleman friend on the side, and maybe have my wife, and so everybody else is doing. Then you realize, well, a lot of that was steeped in this whole identity of not being able to be authentic. The whole idea of stringing this man and this woman along was not my thought. It was me perpetuating playing the game. And so many times too, folks are playing the game, and it's an output of church experience. So, what constitutes church hurt? This has been lifted a bit already. It's betrayal of trust. You are connected to an institution and an institutional leader and just a body. And that is shattered through deception, through lies, and through disappointment. I have heard experiences where folks, have confided with their faith leader around, at the time what they have deemed as a struggle. And it's like, this is what I'm dealing with, or this is who I am, and I really need some prayer and some guidance. And then that's the sermon the next Sunday. Or you being pointed out in the pews. Or this whole roundabout, some of y'all in here and y'all dealing with such and such, you walking right to where you are but not saying. It's just like, well, how traumatic must that be? And how often we can't even recover from that because of that type of betrayal. So that is one element. Any thoughts, Jack?
With church hurt, it does trigger me just a tad.
Sure.
Because as a child that has grown up deeply rooted in church, I couldn't do the activities. Like, I think that is part of the reason why when I graduated high school, I became rambunctious. Like, when I got in college, I was tatted up. I wanted to go to every party, like, because my mom did not let me do anything that was not aligning with God. Like, if it didn't align with Christianity and how you're going to propel as a godly man, it was out of her. No, you're not doing that. When I got my haircut into a mohawk my senior year, she lost it. She literally, I'm telling you the truth, she took clippers and cut my hair, like my buzz cut. She was like, you're not having mohawks in my house, that is homosexuality, we're not doing that. Like, I used to love to journal as a kid. No. If you want to write something, write a book report about the Revelation, about the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of things that, as an adult, I find myself being like, stop doing that, or stop being like that, because that's not your upbringing no more. Like, we appreciate mommy for instilling the spirituality in us, but at the same time, like, my walk ain't your walk.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
And
saying?
that's a whole portion of this talk that talks about the healing process.
And I think the church tries to, like, build who they want you to be in this life. And it's like, when you stray away from that, now it's like all hell to you, because like, now you're not doing what thus said the Lord. But it's like, God didn't create you to try to control me. Like, we all have our own destiny.
And that's just the word control. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes.
And I'm in another institution, not just like the Black church, but also like the Black family as an institution, and how like sometimes that can be, I guess, like parasitic on like Black queer people's experiences as well, and how they can like act together
100%.
to like exclude people in similar ways, or like they feed off of each other. Sometimes like the Black family, or the Black church operates as the Black family, and vice versa.
100%. Yeah, and that's absolutely, yeah.
Like, my mom wasn't like a in church all the time person. My grandmother was, and so like we would go with grandma, but sometimes we didn't. So like, while we're present in the Black family, so too is the church, even though we're not.
In the building.
Like, the values are still present and operating and functioning in the same space, but they may not be the same space.
And that's a great lift. That is a fantastic lift, and I mentioned it a bit in the beginning. The pillars of the Black community, the two legs of the Black community are faith and family, and they might not necessarily be one and the same, but run in parallel so much so to where there are, and a lot of these elements, unfortunately so, can be translated into familial experiences. And so this talk doesn't necessarily bring out the added specificities of the family itself, but certainly recognize that faith and family run in congruence, specifically as a part of the Black experience. And then one thing too is we use a great word, values. And so even folks who might not necessarily go to a building every Sunday, governed by sort of this sense of value that is birthed from the Black church. Even when we look at the whole people's constructs around marriage and gender identity and expression and gender expression and all these things, while not necessarily birthed from the church or the family, certainly are used as weapons in both institutions. So that is certainly worth lifting, and some good feedback even as we look at how we respond to our community's needs. Any other thoughts? This is rich though, thank you. I'd much rather hear from y'all than this anyway.
I just believe that if you, I haven't actually asked this question, but I believe that if you ask brothers on the street corner about homosexuality, and they say, oh no, that ain't right, and you say, why?
Mm-hmm.
God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Are you
Right,
Christian?
and you
go
just
to
stole my
church?
car, and now it's like you got so much of values.
And these are guys who are not a part of the church necessarily. But I say all that to say, I think our entire culture, at least here in the U.S., is informed by church, whether you're a church person or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so church hurt, or at least some of the damage that church and religion has done to the culture is not specific to the members of those churches and other religions.
Very well said.
Right? It really ends up emanating throughout the entire society and poisoning all of us.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a great analogy because how many other folks have experienced like having some specifically LGBTQ plus, conversation or anything, and it kind of all of a sudden folks want to fold in the whole religion piece of what God said, or I don't want to be the yardstick for God because I don't think this is right. It's like, well, sir, man,
It's like this barbershop talk.
Yeah.
All the time. Like, for some reason, I don't know, I don't even, like, I think in the barbershop that I go to, like, none of them kind of know my sexuality, but every time I'm in there, it's something about Diddy and why Diddy and T.D. Jason and all this other stuff. And I'm like, why when I come in here, it's always, and we switch it to this, and then we get into the whole religion talk about homosexuality and things like that, and all y'all done had kids out of wedlock. Don't be casting your sin against, casting my sin and saying like my homosexuality is an issue. When you have done things same with other people, and I don't have to bring up that you got 5 baby mamas. You don't have to bring up my sexuality either, or it's something that has to go around that area.
Yeah.
And I think that all stems from like the construct of things are like from the church side, because that's all we really had back then to really lean on. And I think people just pick straws at this point, just to try to make sure that they prove that point.
Yeah, and even like, and thank you for that, everyone, even just in how we frame and deem elements of humanity as sin versus not. That is also still an output of the church, because I remember, and I'm maybe the second oldest in the room right now, but there was a time. well, I am actually, not a baby at all. But there was a time just 20 years ago where, if a man wore 2 earrings, that was already a telltale sign of what was what. Now everybody wears earrings, dangling and boots or like, if a man carrying like a small satchel for his things, that was already very much clockable. But now you look up, it's just a way of life. So the thing is too, it's just like when we look at culture and how culture sort of evolves and how people pick certain things. I remember I was from a school too where women dared not wear bare legs to church.
Oh yeah, you can wear.
Yeah, you must wear stockings. Now women don't even wear stockings. I'd rather wear stockings before the women wear stockings. That's the whole idea of like, and so the thing is too, it's like, well, people kind of look at these kind of cultural or these value mores through the lens of sort of this isolated portion of culture. And we can just go back further around how people would pick certain things and make it a big deal, and all of a sudden, like, oh, who cares? Oh, that's cool, But it's just like, well, the damage that does. You think about a woman who fought to wear pants, and all of a sudden, we don't even think twice about women in the pants. But the whole idea is there has been so much perpetual damage that the institution has a role in repairing. Chris and Jay.
Kind of interesting, way of thinking was from my grandparents when I told them about me being gay. They were like, well, you're gonna go through so much more pain in sorrow through this journey. You know what I mean? Rather than like kind of sticking like, oh, you know, the church, this is it. And then I thought that was an interesting way of kind of like talking to me about it, rather than kind of like demonizing how I was. I just thought that was just something interesting. How they're like, well, you know, you're gonna have to deal with so much more barriers and issues, you know, going down this path. You know what I mean? So, just something to think about.
Going down this path.
What I think is crazy is when I look at like, cause when I look at like fashion and like all of that stuff, men back in the day used to wear crop tops. The football players used to wear the jersey crop tops, and the girls and the short shorts. The basketball players short shorts, and the girls would go crazy over that. And then there was a time 10 years ago where if you wore a crop top as a man, you automatically identified as gay. And it's like, no, it's just a fashion. Doesn't necessarily mean that has to be connected with a sexuality because of how they're dressed. I've seen a lot of men that wear crop tops and short shorts and have wives and kids.
And their wives love it.
And their wives love it. You know what I'm saying? So it's really just a mindset too, a maturity, because a lot of people are not mature in certain mindsets and knowing that sexuality does not pick how you dress or how you carry yourself.
Yeah, and this doesn't cover that at all, but we know this from the work. Gender identity, gender expression, sexuality, all different markers of humanity. You know, so if like any of the examples that you mentioned, how you express yourself versus how you identify what you do with your body are two different things.
Right. I know that was about church.
But it speaks of how culture, dominant culture plays a part in what we do. And I'm gonna move on too, but just, Dr. Q, you might remember this too, just even how the cuts of suits have changed over the decades.
For sure.
And I remember being just a little boy with this massively oversized suit on, pants all the way down, a jacket all the way down. But even then, if your suit was too tailored 30 years ago, that was already a teen.
You was a girl.
Yeah.
You was one of the
So
girls.
dominant culture plays a major part in how people perpetuate harm. We'll hear from Khalil, we'll move on. I know it's good dialogue.
Awesome.
This was a good topic, Gerald.
Thank you, Khalil.
So I have a reflection, but then also a question.
Sure.
What you were saying reminded me of Cardi B when she's talking about like instead of like telling your gay kids they're going to hell, like wants to teach them to fight, sort of thing. Like this is out of like concern for like what this means for your life, and I think that's a cool kind of perspective and lens to look at things. But I wanted to ask, and I think you were talking around it too, Dr. Key, so feel free to chime in, but that response from like your own church leaders, that might sound like, I'm okay with this, and I might even be affirming of you and like who you are, but the church body won't, or this specific church body won't, this congregation won't. Did that feel satisfying to you, or do you wish there was something else? Like the way that you both described it is like, there's some sort of like finality or permanence there, and I'm wondering if there like, should be something else, or did you wish there was something else, and what that might have been. I think about the trust piece on the last slide, and the judgment here, and just like what it means to be a person in power and receive that information, but also exist in that space and be communicating with you in that way.
That's a beautiful question, and certainly, I know I was 19, 20 years old, and at the onset of it, I was kind of disappointed. I was just like, this is your time to make it happen, sir, to make it count. Turn this ship around. But then, you know, it also gave me a chance to really sort of look into the kind of the bureaucracy of institutions. I don't think I really understood, like, up until then, how there is a way you can, like, address a person versus address a machine. And so it really kind of helped me look at, well, which battles did I really want to, personally, which battles did I really want to fight? Did I really want to come in here and cause disruption just because I want to wear flat twists? Like, this is really not that important to me as much as I thought. So that put it in perspective for me. But it also gave me a great deal, allowed me to give my former pastor a great deal of grace, recognizing now that, you know, it was only a couple years after, it was like, it's hard being in charge. And the whole idea is like, and yeah, like that's a lot of work. And then I just remember me walking in there with my little hair going and my shiny shirt on. He looked like, okay, I'm trying to hear you, bro, but this is a lot. This is not nothing I've ever had to deal with. Right. So I was able to give him some grace. But what it did also too is help me to see much more clearly where I saw myself in the work. And so even like I realized too, me showing up authentically was part of the work for me. But me also having and creating safe spaces. We often talk about safe spaces being created for us as LGBT people, but not necessarily how do we create spaces for our allies to show up in a way in which we're not challenging them so much so to where they're disengaged. And I was able to see that 25 years ago. So that was my experience. Dr. Q, did you want to add?
Yeah, I do. So my experience was not personal. It wasn't about affirming me. It was just sort of discussions about LGBT issues with pastors, various pastors. And for me, it occurred like college, right?
Yeah.
In my spirit, it occurred like college. But it's your job. You get paid to do this, and it's important to you and your family. And I get that. I guess what I have tried to do with the folks that I heard enough about to do it was to encourage them. So what's the path, right? Like how do you bring your congregation along? Maybe not even to full acceptance, but what's your path for making the experience of the gays in your church and the not so?
Yes, the gays.
Because they're coming, they're flat twins.
Right? What's the path for making your space safer for them? And try to engage them around that. And also, I'm always challenging my friends about, well, what is God telling you? I hear the politics, I hear the logistics, I understand the logistics, but what's God telling you?
It feel like church for real.
Okay. Yes.
That's great. And we're going to hear from DeMonte quick and we're going to move forward.
Quick. When you were answering his question, the only thing I could think of is like God doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself in that time. Think about where you would be if he affirmed you and you stayed in your congregation affirmed, but like in this bubble of like being in church hurt, and now you're a part of the church hurt instead of where you are, who you are today in your authentic
You
self.
better wave your hand. Preaching. No, DeMonte's in here giving us a word.
Both of y'all. So I'm sure y'all read it because it's been up here, but also we're looking at judgment and emotional manipulation. As such as then we talk about gaslighting, guilt tripping, and exploiting vulnerability. Those have just been major parts. I can't speak enough around how I was just made to feel guilty about everything. And I know it was a principle that I really had to do like some work to get away from, was this whole idea that, well, because Christ suffered, then I too must suffer. But people will really find ways to be like, well,
To really stretch that.
yeah,
For real.
you going to do, you got too full of yourself. We got to knock you down kind of situation. We talked about both of these. All of these are really exclusion and rejection, just being different and how that you're isolated in that way. And spiritual abuse. We talk about like physical harm, but coercion and blackmail are also major parts of how we are having to navigate in that space. This whole idea of don't tell nobody, or even sadly so, well, this is my tea too, but if you tell me, I'll kill you. I'll make you disappear. It gets that extreme for some folks. Yeah. Jay, did you have something you need?
I was gonna say, I lost it as soon as you said my name. The word says that God does not have a respect of person. And that to me speaks volumes, because, and it also says he made us in his likeness and in his image. And when I really researched and studied that, for me, what that meant was how he designed Jeremy is exactly the way that I'm supposed to be. It doesn't matter if it makes anybody else feel uncomfortable. It doesn't matter if it's like, well, no, I really see you as this. You didn't design me in your likeness and your image.
Yeah.
That's why all of us in this room are different, because God designed us in his life and in his image. So that means when you look at yourself, you're looking at God. Whatever you believe in, it's like somebody created you to be this peculiar and unique person. And that's how I've always looked at it.
I love that. And even just embracing our evolution too. It's like you look at the different versions in which a flower goes through. Like each of those flowers is still a flower, from a seed to a seedling to a flower to a...
The process
bouquet.
goes through so many processes.
But saying that to say too, it's no less of itself at those different journeys. And then just to echo or to add to what you said too, my current pastor, he brought something that was just so dynamic. He said, some months ago at this point, it's like, how can we profess to be the body of Christ and we don't love the bodies in which we're in? And so
That's
just
so
such a reminder as well.
Yeah,
Oh no. Okay, well y'all hold your comments to the end.
Okay.
We talked about this.
It's so good, Gerald.
Thank you. You're gonna have to do a round two. Put that in your evaluation. We talked about all of these: loss of faith, emotional trauma, spiritual disconnection, loneliness, and then impact on future relationships. I know too. I had a season I call it my wilderness, but I wasn't talking. Not only was I not going to church, I didn't want to be all with church people. None of them. I saw my mom because she was my mama girl. Don't tell me about the church. Don't tell me about what I got on because I will leave. It was very much so that caused. And my mother's my favorite person, but I was like, girl, you represent the institution, and if you want me around, don't bring it up. It really got to that. And she was very much too, okay, if this is what you give me, well, I'll see you when I see you. And we both was getting it. Like, so it impacts relationships.
They got you together.
Right, I'm trying to get her. She like, okay, well, you beware, you ain't in silver shirt.
Not just it for sure.
Driving down like, I can't believe how to heal. We've been talking about it a bit, but certainly this deserves more than 10 minutes. Understanding trauma. Well, we talked about that. Trauma has become such a major word in how we navigate not only faith work, but our work just as SGL people and LGBTQ plus people. So, prefacing with that, I'm not a therapist, but know a little bit of something. Trauma, we talk about trauma, big T. Anybody know the difference between big T, little t trauma? Wonderful, yes you should, as a psychiatrist in training. Big T is cataclysmic, major, life-changing stuff. That is getting hit by a car, that is sexual assault, that is robbery, that is, major, life-altering, physically, often physical, impacting things. Little T trauma are things that are not necessarily life-threatening, but still very, very impactful. So that's being lied on, that's interpersonal conflict, that's a nasty breakup, that's, being teased, little trauma. So we think about big T trauma that is very, bodily harm, impactful issues. Little T or small T are things that are, while not necessarily physical, still very much harmful. And so church hurt would be little T that could potentially lead to big T. So a lot of times too, and folks who I work with, are really big into shared language. So being able to recognize and call out exactly what's happening so you can respond accordingly. So again, thinking about, being hit by a car versus gas poisoning. They both can kill you, just very kind of different ways. Getting hit by a car will kill you instantly, gas poisoning over time, but you can die from both. Same with big T, little T trauma and the church experience. And then we think about years and years for many of us being exploited, being manipulated, being, poorly managed. That is like gas poisoning. It's happening over time and it can be very, very damaging. So when we look at healing from church hurt, it's very important to define it as abuse. A lot of times, and we can look at experience, it's just, this is just my cross to bear, this is what God called me to, Christ suffered, so should I. All this different stuff that we do to justify church hurt, we have to call it what it is so we can respond to it accordingly. Church hurt is abuse. And it was not really until first I can give that language for myself to where I can show up in the world and hold folks accountable in how they engage with me and then how I was able to get to a good place myself. So if someone has been misusing their power, that's abuse. If someone has been manipulating you, that's abuse. If someone has been teasing, ostracizing, or putting you in places to where you feel devalued, that's abuse. And so that's really important that we define what it is in order for us to respond accordingly. Step 2 is to really separate harmful behaviors versus from the character of God. So a lot of times too, we will define, and a few folks mentioned too, the institution or the representative or the misrepresentative of God as the voice of God. So we have to really do work to recognize that what spirit is very different from this hurtful and harmful behavior. And so being able to go into that place to recognize that there are very clear differences, and a few folks mentioned as well, of what God is versus what this institution or these people are. This is also something, is reclaim your spiritual practices. Has anybody ever served in church or done something in church or,
I used to be a youth minister.
Yeah, what were you in there?
Assembly.
Okay. Let the record reflect. What about you? because of the institution. And you know, even when we look at praying and meditating and, you know, praise dancing or working a soundboard, or all these different things that we would sort of bring as our offering to God that we disengage with because we disengage from the institution. And so this is an invitation for us to really reclaim those practices in a way, because that is service as unto God. We talked about a flower. It's a flower gives God glory by being a flower, by doing all things that flowers do. Each of you are flowers. So you give God glory by doing what you do. Some of us sing, some of us dance, some of us write. Like I said, I kept the finance office. Not sexy, but a necessary role in the, I still do actually, fun fact. But the whole idea is like, this is our time to really look at how do we present these gifts back to God, notwithstanding the spiritual and hurt and manipulation. And then recognizing that we want practices that serve our whole sense of self. I know too, many times we might have been manipulated or exploited or guilted into doing things too. And so like we might have to reimagine or redefine what that looks like. And then this is something my grandmother gave me many years ago, also one of my favorite people, when I was disengaging from the church and just like, you know, but dear, I don't like this, and I just got this. This is not it. And she encouraged me. I just, you know, I hold it dear to this day. She spoke to the journey like a flower, like a bouquet, and you pick certain flowers along the way that serve you in that moment, and then you have a unique bouquet specific to you that is undeniable. And so when we look at our faith practices, oftentimes it's that. Some of us pray, and then we picked up maybe some, you know, meditation, maybe some chanting, maybe some ancestral veneration, maybe some Tai Chi, and you have all these things, and we've been taught like we have to forfeit, or it's like, well, I can't love Jesus and yoga, or I can't love, you know, Allah and breath work. You can do whatever y'all sort of, and so recognizing too, like you can reclaim your spiritual practices in a way that serves who you are. Same analogy as a flower. What a seedling needs might look very different than a full plant, but you still have to make sure that it gets what it needs in the current version of itself. So what used to serve you might serve you in a different kind of way now. Prioritize your own healing. This is certainly its own topic at the top of the list. If you got to step away, if you got to disengage, if you got to talk to somebody, if you have to, you know, reset what institutions of faith look like, put that first. I know a lot of times too that I suffered in silence in church. Like I went just because that was part of my commitments, and it would look bad if I wasn't there, all these different things, and it's just like, and the whole time depleting myself and diminishing myself. And so, you know, we should really look at what do we need to do to get a clear heart and a clear sense of self to move forward. We talked about these for a bit too, but they certainly deserve a recount. Step back and refocus. You know, praise and worship leader in your heart, you're sick of everybody, you might need to step back. Or you teach a Sunday school and you sick of these children and their parents, you might need to step back. Like, and that's okay. Step back, pray for healing and refocus. And then practice forgiveness. That is a whole other 2 hours in itself. You know, forgiveness is not easy. And then many of us at the intersections of identity, we've experienced all kinds of abuse, you know, from racism to homophobia to femophobia to you name it. And so we really have to make sure we give ourselves what we need in order to get to a healed place. And then committing to acting and reacting in love. So how to do that is to validate your emotions. Everything you felt and experienced is real. And we got a therapist in training here can tell you, anybody who's engaged in therapy, that's one of the first things that you do is start to get a handle on your feelings and be validated. What happened to me was wrong? Yes, it was. That in and of itself is healing, because you've been doing me wrong for years, and be able to say, damn, how much steam has come off of somebody just acknowledging that. So validating your emotions is so key, specifically as it relates to institutions of faith. Number 2 is seek support. It might not be that same pastor who was perpetuating the harm. Honor that. And so getting connected to not only faith leaders, but other types of leaders, therapists, counselors. You know, church hurt is such a major part of who, what's shaped and framed our experiences as GL men and LGBT people. And so being able to seek support, be it with a group, being in work like this is very key.
This is gonna sound bad, but I bet this is a safe space, so I'm gonna say it.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to start going back to church, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was things that were happening in the church that just made me be like, no, this is why I don't want to come here. Because when I think about church, I think about it being a place where everybody's like in this aura, in this energy together. They're worshiping, they're praising. What the piece that misses me is when we start to become too personable in church. You know, and I get it, it's a communal place. It's supposed to be that way. But I think the dynamic, it loses its what am I looking for? Authenticity when we stop governing ourselves in a spiritual manner. And if we could get that piece better, I think the church will be better. Because the church is in our hearts. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, if us as a people could understand that when we come together in this space, it's not about what you got on. It's not about how good you can sing. It's not about how your hair looks. It's really about embodying the spirituality and invoking God.
Yeah, and that's not bad at all, actually. I think it's not in here, but the whole dynamic of a couple things. Certainly, like you said, recognizing that this work is a collective work of human beings, and we all have should have a shared sense of governance in what keeps this body and this work moving. It's that part in between the should be is where the work is, specific to the communities we serve and represent. And then that's the reminder too, while it's by no means an excuse, but certainly gives us ways in how we strategically do the work, recognizing that these are human beings. And that might mean we need to have enhanced levels of support on how to hold human beings, not just accountable, but to drive the work, because we know this, specifically more so in the communities we serve and represent. I actually wrote something that might be worth sharing. How do we serve and socialize in the same spaces? You know, so the same idea is like, what, these are 3 minutes? Oh, well, y'all went over into my time because the break was late and we had tech issues. Severe tech issues. Fellows, this is a democracy, right? Can I have 5 minutes? Yeah,
You have 3.
You can have 3 minutes or 5? 3.
I mean, it's so good. It's so good.
And no shade, y'all talked about 40%.
We did.
Revisit your beliefs. Reflect upon your beliefs and what served you then might not serve you now. Embrace self-love. That's worth the whole minute for me. In the sense of, so long we have been taught to hate everything about ourselves through the lens of God. We have to really redefine the voice of God in this work. So nurture self-care and self-love as a part of your healing work. And then also you might explore some new spiritual communities, you know, just as a part of the journey. There are elements of the faith that might go beyond what you have been taught or what you were received as a child. We'll bypass this. I just want to elevate too, doing the work around restoring trust, knowing that takes time with any relationship, specifically with faith spaces. So extending grace to yourself and to those institutions, but having a very clear sense of what will serve you and what will not. And being, like you said, able to hold institutions and leaders accountable. This is what you're not going to do. And be okay with that. And leave if it's not serving you.
Absolutely.
And churches, institutions must acknowledge the existence of church hurt and move toward and commit to spaces of healing. That is what the institutions must do. Recap. Begin by healing yourself by defining what you've experienced as abuse, then aligning support accordingly to your individual needs as a part of that healing. Connect to religious institutions and spiritual institutions that serve who you are and who you're becoming. Connect to care, therapy, counseling, new pastor, new church, you name it. Understand that these effects of might show up in other spaces in your life, in other relationships, and even how you show up in the world. So recognizing that that is an intersectionality, even in family that was raised early, that might show up as well. Questions for reflection? We've been reflecting for the last hour. These are some references that I'll share with y'all. Yeah, please. Come on, references. Yeah, right.
I want to get what yours.
Yes.
I got it. Thank you.
Yes. And this is a quote I use all the time doing this work, specifically talking to pastors. It's creating safe spaces and opportunities for trust creates safe spaces and thus brave spaces. And that's it.
Thank you, Gerald.
And of course, if folks have questions, want to know more, want to connect, I'm here all week.
Like your journey of like how you like when you left the church and like what happened.
I can. It was a lot happening between that time. Maybe we can do it at lunch because I know.